Boots scrape across dry dirt, slow and heavy, as a lantern light flickers against the splintered boards of a house too tired to stand. The air tastes of dust and whispers, the kind that crawl beneath doors and cling to names already broken. Some stories begin with a gunfight, but this one began with hunger, with shame, and with the hollow echo of a child's empty stomach. In the town of Dust Haven, where dusk falls quicker than mercy, and doors close to shut out more than just the wind, one woman's fight for survival was about to stir a tale no gossip could silence. The wind carried a hush across the town of Dust Haven, a place where the prairie met the edge of memory. Wooden storefronts leaned tiredly beneath the sun, their paint chipped, their signs faded, as though even the boards themselves had grown weary of holding so many secrets. Horses clopped across the dirt road, pulling wagons creaking under the weight of lives that seemed to move forward only by habit. It was in this place, on one faded morning, that Eli Cartwright first laid eyes on the girl who would change everything. Not for her beauty alone, though she carried that too, but for the quiet plea stitched into the air around her. Eli was no stranger to hardship. Once a ranch hand, then a drifter, he bore the lean, weathered look of a man who had seen more than he spoke of. His hands, callous and scarred, had built fences, broken horses, and buried too many dreams beneath the dust. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, though his eyes betrayed the loneliness that gnawed at him, night after night, as he sat before the dying embers of fire. Folks in town whispered of his past, how his family's ranch had burned, how his woman had left with another, how he'd never stayed long enough in any place to let his wound scab over. He did not answer gossip. He lived with it, as one lives with the ache of an old injury. On that morning, Eli saw her standing in front of the general store, a child clutching her hand. The woman was small, almost fragile in stature. Her dress faded from wear, her bonnet shading eyes that glistened with a kind of quiet desperation. The girl beside her could not have been more than 7, her braids crooked, her shoes worn thin. They both carried the look of travelers who had not yet found where they belonged. The mother, Clara Mae Dawson, held her chin high despite the weight on her shoulders. Dust Haven had seen its share of women cast adrift by the times, but there was something different in the way Clara stood, as though she refused to bow to the judgment pressing in from every direction. The first to break the silence was not Eli, but the murmur of townsfolk nearby. On the porch of the saloon, a pair of men nursed their drinks even in the pale morning, their laughter carrying across the street. There goes the widow Dawson. One spat, voice dripping with mockery. Husband gone 3 years, and she still drags that little one around like some curse. Another chuckled. Reckon she's looking for a new bed to warm, but who'd take her with baggage like that? The words sliced the air, sharp enough for Clara to hear, though she did not falter. Instead, she gathered her daughter closer and moved forward. Eli, watching from the shade near the blacksmith's, felt something stir inside him, not pity exactly, but recognition. He knew the taste of such cruel judgment. He knew what it was to be spoken of as if he weren't worth the air he breathed. Later that day, their paths crossed again. Clara stood at the well outside the church, drawing water, her daughter perched on the edge with solemn patience far too old for her years. Eli approached slowly, his boots stirring the dust, his voice low when he spoke. "Hot morning for hauling water alone," he said, offering his hand at the rope. She hesitated, studying him, then let him take it. "We manage," she replied, her voice soft but steady. There was a guardedness in her tone, the kind born from too many disappointments. Yet, when Eli hoisted the bucket with ease, the child's eyes lit with something like admiration. "What's your name, sir?" the girl asked, her small voice cutting through the air. "The lie," he answered, crouching so his eyes met hers. "And yours?" "Mary," she said, shy but proud, glancing to her mother as if for approval. Clara offered the faintest nod. It was not much that moment, but it lingered with Eli the rest of the day. He replayed it as he worked mending a fence at the edge of town, the way Clara's hands had trembled just slightly on the bucket, the way Mary had looked at him as though he were something more than a drifter. He told himself not to think on it too long, for nothing good ever came of him lingering. And yet, when the sun dipped low, he found himself walking past the church again, just to see if perhaps they were near. Dust Haven was a place where stories spread faster than wildfire, and already tongues wagged about Clara, the widow who could not keep a man, the child who would grow up wild. The whispers wrapped around her like a noose, but she walked through them with her head unbowed. Eli admired that, though he knew the cruelty cut deep. He had seen too many strong souls crumble under less. That night, in the quiet of his cabin on the outskirts, Eli sat by the fire and thought of her words. We manage. He wondered how long they could manage, alone against the weight of the world. He wondered why it should matter to him at all. Yet it did. He remembered the way Mary's small hand had clutched Clara's, tight as though letting go would mean losing everything. The days that followed drew them closer, in small ways. At the market, Eli lifted a sack of flour into Clara's cart when he saw her struggling. At church, Mary slipped from her mother's pew to sit beside him, swinging her legs in rhythm with the hymns. Clara said little, but her eyes softened just barely when Eli tipped his hat. Still, tension brewed. One evening, outside the saloon, a drunken rancher blocked Clara's path, his words lewd, his laughter cruel. Eli stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. That'll be enough. The rancher sneered, ready for a fight, but something in Eli's stance, a stillness like coiled steel, sent him stumbling back instead. Clara's breath hitched, her hand tightening around Mary's. For a heartbeat, her eyes met Eli's, and in them was a flicker of something he had not seen before. Trust. It was then the town's gossip turned sharper. Whispers claimed the widow had found herself protector, perhaps even more. Some said Clara had offered herself to Eli in exchange for safety. Others that he had taken pity on her for the child's sake. None of it was true, but in Dust Haven, truth mattered less than the tale. Clara bore with quiet grace, but Eli saw the strain in her shoulders, the way she held herself tighter, as though bracing against an unseen storm. And still, he could not stay away. Something bound him now, invisible but undeniable. Perhaps it was Mary's laughter, rare but bright, or the way Clara's strength shone even when she seemed most fragile. Perhaps it was simply that he saw in them the reflection of his own loneliness, the chance to belong where he had not before. By the end of that first week, Eli found himself standing at Clara's door. He had no excuse, only a quiet offering, a small sack of apples, rare and sweet in Dust Haven. Clara opened the door, surprise flickering across her face, then something gentler. Mary clapped her hands with delight, pulling her mother toward the gift. For the first time, Clara smiled, not a guarded, polite smile, but one that reached her eyes. And in that moment, Eli felt the world shift, as though the dust itself had parted to reveal a path he had not dared to hope for. It was not love yet, not in the way folks told it in songs, but it was the beginning of something that felt like it might be. And so the story began, not with declarations or promises, but with a smile at a doorway, a sack of apples, and a man who had thought himself too broken to ever be needed again. The days slipped into one another, as they do in a small town where the sun rises on dust and sets on the same. Yet within that sameness, something began to shift for Eli and Clara. Their meetings were no longer accidents at the well or fleeting nods in the churchyard. They became part of the rhythm of Dust Haven itself, as natural as the tolling of the chapel bell. Still, beneath each shared glance, beneath every cautious word, lay a tension that hung like a wire stretched too tight. It was not simply the whisper of gossip, though that ran rampant. It was the unspoken question of whether two lives so frayed could ever be stitched together without tearing further apart. Eli found himself drawn toward Clara and Mary with an instinct that surprised even him. He had lived long in silence, keeping his distance from others as though closeness might invite ruin. Yet Clara carried with her a gravity that pulled him in, not through need alone, but through resilience. He watched her scrub clothes at the stream, her hands raw from lie, her back bent but unbroken. He noticed how Mary clung to her skirts, both shield and anchor, as though her mother's presence alone held back the world's cruelty. The sight of them stirred a tenderness in Eli that he thought long dead, the kind that made a man wonder not what he'd lost, but what he might still protect. Clara, for her part, wrestled with conflicting currents. She had learned not to trust easily, for every kindness in her life had come chained with a demand. Since her husband's passing, offers had been made, Coarse men with eyes on her body, matrons with sharp tongues who suggested she give Mary over to relatives better suited to provide. She had refused all of them, clinging to her daughter as the last piece of herself worth saving. When Eli appeared, quiet and steady, without demand or judgment, she did not know what to make of him. She felt the weight of his gaze, not hungry but searching, and though part of her wanted to push it away, another part ached for its warmth. The town's murmur only grew. In Dust Haven, loneliness was weakness, and weakness was something to be pried apart. Women whispered at the mercantile. Men smirked in the saloon. Cartwright's found himself a widow, they said. Or maybe the widow's found herself a fool. Clara heard the words, let them slide across her like rain over stone, but inside, each barb left its sting. Mary, too, sensed the weight, though she could not name it. She asked her mother why folks looked at them with narrowed eyes. Clara had no answer that would not break her daughter's heart. One evening, as the last light bled across the prairie, Eli found Clara outside the small cabin she rented near the edge of town. Mary slept within, the window cracked to lend the breeze. Clara sat on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, though the night was warm. Eli stopped a few paces away, unsure if his presence was welcome, but when she lifted her gaze, she did not turn him aside. You should know what they're saying, she told him, her voice low, almost brittle. I know, Eli said. You don't care. He paused, searching for the right words. I've lived my life under the weight of folks' talk. Can't say it's ever fed me or kept me warm. Truth is, their words don't change what I see. Her eyes lingered on him, searching for the seat, finding none. For a moment, the wall she had built around herself loosened, and she let him see the exhaustion she usually hid. I'm tired, Eli, she whispered. Tired of fighting for every scrap of respect. Tired of raising Mary in a place that wants to strip us bare. Something within him ached at her confession. He wanted to reach for her hand, but he held back, knowing too much too soon would only frighten her. Instead, he sat beside her on the step, close enough for his presence to be felt, far enough to give her space. The silence between them was not empty but alive, carrying the pulse of things unspoken. That night marked a quiet shift. From then on, Clara no longer kept him at the edges of her life. He carried water with her, repaired the hinge on her door, helped Mary learn to ride an old pony he had once broken. Each act was small, yet woven together they formed something steady, something like trust. Mary's laughter became more frequent, her eyes brightening whenever Eli appeared. Clara noticed it too, though she tried not to dwell on what it might mean. Yet just as tenderness grew, so too did danger. One man in particular, Silas Boone, had long set his sights on Clara. A cattleman with a temper like gunpowder and a pride that brooked no rejection, he had offered more than once to take her burden off her shoulders. Each time Clara refused, his interest darkened into something uglier. When word spread that she had found company in Eli, Silas's anger boiled. To him, it was not love denied, but pride wounded, and such things festered in men like him. The confrontation came one afternoon outside the smithy. Clara stood with Mary at her side, waiting for nails she could barely afford. When Silas approached, his boots heavy, his grin sharp. Ain't right, you playing house with a drifter, he sneered. Man's got no land, no name worth speaking. You think he can give you what I can? Clara stiffened, drawing Mary closer. Before she could answer, Eli stepped from the shadows, his voice calm but edged with steel. She doesn't need what you're selling, Boone. Silas turned, his jaw tightening. And what are you, Cartwright? Some savior come riding in? You've got nothing. You are nothing. Eli held his gaze without flinching. Maybe so, but I'll not let you lay harm at her door. For a long moment, silence stretched, thick with the promise of violence. Then Silas spat in the dust, his eyes burning with a promise of his own. This ain't over. He stalked away, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara exhaled, her hands trembling as she clutched Mary. When she looked at Eli, gratitude and fear warred in her eyes. You've made an enemy, she whispered. Maybe, Eli said, but some things are worth it. It was the first time he allowed the truth to slip, the truth that had grown quietly between them like a seed in dry soil. Clara did not answer, but her silence was not rejection. It was a silence filled with weight, with possibility. As night fell, Eli returned to his cabin, but he could not shake the image of Clara's face. Pale with fear, yet softened with something else when she looked at him. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. Dust Haven had a way of breaking even the strongest souls. And now, with Silas Boone's shadow looming, he sensed the storm was only just gathering. Yet for the first time in years, Eli did not feel hollow. For the first time, he felt tied to something larger than himself. A woman who carried sorrow like a crown, a child who laughed like sunlight breaking through clouds. He did not yet know how far he would have to go to keep them safe, but he knew one truth clear as the stars burning above. He would not walk away. The storm that had long been brewing in Dust Haven finally broke one restless evening when the air grew thick, the horizon smudged with thunderclouds, and the streets emptied as though the town itself sensed what was coming. Clara stood at her window, her daughter Mary already tucked in, though sleep had not yet claimed the child. Clara's hands shook as she drew the curtain closed. She had felt it for days. Silas Boone's eyes following her, the mutter of men at the saloon, the tightening coil of gossip that made her every step heavier. She had endured whispers before, but this was different. This was danger with teeth. Eli sat outside on his porch, his rifle across his knees, staring at the dust rolling across the plain. He had carried a rifle in many places, some just, some not, but never had the weight of its steel felt so bound to his heart. He thought of Clara's voice, trembling yet strong when she told him she was tired of fighting. And he thought of Mary's laughter when she had ridden the pony for the first time. For the first time in years, he had something worth defending. That truth frightened him, but it also steadied him. The knock came hard on Clara's door, shaking the frame. Mary sat up in bed, eyes wide, clutching her doll. Clara pressed a finger to her lips, signaling silence, before moving to the door. She did not open it, but she knew the voice. "Evening, Miss Mayfield," Silas Boone drawled, the words soaked in menace. "You've been keeping mighty fine company with that drifter. Thought I'd come by. See if maybe you're ready to make a wiser choice." Clara's heart hammered, but she forced her tone to remain even. "Go home, Silas. I want no part of you." A laugh, sharp and cruel, answered, "Oh, I think you do. A woman's place is beside a man who can provide. That man sure as hell ain't Cartwright." Before Clara could answer, another voice cut through the night, firm and low, carrying with it the weight of finality. "That's enough, Boone." Eli stepped from the shadows, rifle steady in his hands. His presence was quiet but unyielding, the kind of presence that left no room for bluff. Silas turned, his grin faltering. "Well, look who crawled out of the dark. You think standing there makes you a hero?" "I'm no hero," Eli said evenly, "but I won't let you harm them." The street had filled with silent onlookers, faces pressed to windows, doors cracked open. Dust Haven was a place that thrived on spectacle, and tonight it had found one. Clara opened the door then, Mary clinging to her skirts, her eyes wide with fear, but also with a strange, budding trust in the man who stood between them and danger. Silas's hand hovered near his holster, his bravado cracking under the weight of Eli's unwavering stare. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice shaking now. "A man like me doesn't forget." Eli's grip on the rifle tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Maybe, but tonight you walk away." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still. Then Silas's hand twitched, not enough for a draw, but enough to show his intent. The crowd gasped. Eli didn't fire. Instead, with deliberate slowness, he lowered his rifle to the side and stepped forward. "You want to prove yourself, Boone? Do it with your hands. But know this, if you touch her, if you so much as look at that child wrong again, I'll end it. Do you understand?" Silas's bluster drained on the quiet steel in Eli's voice. He spat in the dirt, fury smoldering, then turned on his heel and stalked into the darkness. The crowd exhaled, whispers swelling like wind through dry grass. The danger had not passed forever, but for tonight it was stayed. Clara's knees nearly buckled as relief flooded her. Mary clung tighter, whispering, "Mama, it's over, isn't it?" Clara kissed her hair, whispering back, "For now, sweetheart, for now." Eli approached the porch slowly, his eyes on Clara, not the watching town. "I didn't mean to bring this to your door," he said softly, "but I couldn't stand by." Clara studied him in the lamplight, the lines of his face carved by hardship, his eyes shadowed by old sorrows. And yet, there was a steadiness there, a truth she could no longer deny. "You didn't bring it," she answered. "You faced it." For the first time, the wall between them cracked wide enough to let something warmer through. She reached out, her hand trembling, and laid it against his arm. It was not a declaration, not even a promise, but it was enough. He covered her hand with his own, a gesture both protective and reverent. And for that moment the whispers of Dust Haven fell away. The days that followed were not free of struggle. Silas's threat lingered like smoke, and the town's gossip did not vanish overnight. But something had shifted. Clara walked with her head higher, no longer shrinking from the eyes that judged her. Eli remained by her side, not as a savior but as a companion, who shared her burdens without diminishing her strength. Mary laughed more freely, her world steadier now that she saw her mother no longer standing alone. One afternoon, as they repaired the fence around Clara's small patch of land, she paused and looked at Eli. "Why do you stay?" she asked, her voice quiet but direct. He thought for a long moment before answering. "Because I know what it is to lose everything. And I know what it is to find something worth holding on to. You and Mary, you've given me that." Her eyes glistened, though no tears fell. She nodded, and the silence between them was filled not with fear, but with understanding. The story of Clara Mayfield and Eli Cartwright did not spread across the West in ballads or dime novels. It lived in quieter places. In the softened gaze of neighbors who began to see more than shame, in the laughter of a child who no longer went to bed hungry, in the steady companionship of two souls who had nearly given up on grace. Dust Haven would always whisper, but for once, its whispers were edged with respect rather than scorn. As the sun dipped behind the horizon one evening, Clara sat with Eli on the porch, Mary asleep inside. The sky was painted in streaks of gold and violet, the cicadas humming their chorus. Clara leaned against him, not in surrender but in peace, and Eli wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The world was still harsh, still uncertain, but in that moment it felt bearable. To those who passed by, they might look like any family resting at the day's end. But for Clara and Eli, it was more. It was a proof that broken lives could be mended, that dignity could rise from ashes, that sometimes home was not a place at all, but the joining of two weary hearts. And if you listen close, perhaps you'll hear the echo of their story in your own. The reminder that even in the loneliest stretches of life, grace can appear unexpected, quiet, and fierce as a man stand in the dust, refusing to let darkness have the final word. Boots scrape across the dry dirt, slow and heavy, as lantern light flickers against the broken boards of a worn-out house. The night carries dust and whispers, each one sharper than truth, each one clinging to a widow's name already bent by shame. Some stories begin with a gunfight, but this one began with hunger, with silence at the dinner table, and the hollow echo of a child's empty stomach. In a town where dusk falls quicker than mercy and doors slam to shut out both wind and compassion, survival was never promised. The question is, when the world turns its back, who will step forward?